Thank you very much. Je vous parlerai aujourd'hui en français et je vous salue tous. Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
I will be speaking French with you. I'd like to greet everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Before we start, I'd like to sign out that this event made simultaneous interpretation available in 4 languages: English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. So you can choose the interpretation channel of your preference in the left lower right corner. So I'm very happy to welcome you in the official launch of the Latin American Association, the Alliance for Subnational Development Banks in Latin America. I thank BDMG, AFD, FMTV, and IDDR for this event. I will be with you during all throughout the event, and when our Secretary General is here, I'm especially happy with the creation of this alliance, because this is an initiative that had its first break when we had the Financial in Common Summit last November. Back then, we had a high-level panel headed by the BDMG showing the roles of a development bank to promote the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. Some of the needs from these banks were identified, and these are the needs that the Alliance intends to serve today. So our speakers in this opening session will present the context in which this community of stakeholders was born and its main purposes. And today we'll be talking about 2 specific points which will be built around into round tables. So we'll talk about subnational banks as policy and market makers locally, and also how cooperation in technical and financial areas can help governments and territories. Before that, I will hand it over to Mr. Sergio Guzman Susudowski, who is the president of the BDMG, the Minas Gerais Development Bank. So Sergio, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you, Audrey. It's an honor to be with you. I'm speaking from Belo Horizonte. This is the state capital of Minas Gerais. I'm speaking as the president of ABDF, the Brazilian Association for Development, with 31 development institutions in Brazil. And I'm also the CEO for the Minas Gerais Development Bank. This institution has 58 years experience of development. We also have great resources to promote the ODS. I'm very happy to be heading this alliance together with our partners, the French development agents, the IDDIRI and MDF. In this regard, I'd like to start my remarks with special thanks to our friend Remy Hugh, leading the AFD and the IDFC. He played a crucial play to promote a global dialogue between development and financial institutes and stakeholders to enhance their role as promoters of sustainable development. In his behalf, I'd like to greet all of the teams that worked diligently to make today possible. I'd also like to thank the presence of the Ibero-American Secretary General, Mrs. Rebecca Greenspan, and the president of the Latin American Association of Development Financing Institutions, ALIDE, Mr. Carlos Linhares, our friend, and he's also the president of the Peruvian Development Bank. I'd like to thank all of the leaderships who took the challenge to share their experience and their visions today. I'd also like to thank everyone who is participating in this event. We have a very qualified audience of experts, development institutions, employees, multilateral organizations, and governments. I begin my speak with the following question. Why this alliance and why now? In November last year, as many of you know, we led a high-level panel during the Finance in Common Summit in Paris, the biggest international bank for development event for international banks and globally, with over 400 institutions participating all over the world. We have regional banks, national banks, subnational banks, and we joined in Paris virtually, actually. This panel that we led discussed the role of subnational banks as agents to implement global development agendas in the local and regional levels, especially in the context of the necessary post-pandemic recovery on a fairer basis. At that time, it was clear that these institutions have a potential, but the barriers and limitations they face were also made clear. SDBs, the national development banks, know the demands, the territory, and the specific aspects of the context where we work. At the same time, we know the language, the instruments, and how the institutions that operate at an international level actually operate. Thus, we can serve as a bridge between available resources and local development demands, supporting key fronts for local development with the development of urban infrastructure projects, for instance, with direct finance to municipalities, support to micro and small companies, sustainable agriculture, gender equality, among other themes in the 2030 agenda. The launch of this alliance is therefore a concrete development of the movement to strengthen subnational banks movement initiated during the Finance in Common Summit. And the purpose is to build a permanent platform to dialogue between institutions in the region to share experience and expand engagement between these institutions in favor of effective implementation of development programs and projects all over Latin America and the Caribbean. So as it will be evident in our first roundtable today, we are a wide and diverse set of institutions. And with this diversity is our strength. We have different capabilities and focuses. The alliance we are launching today will help us bring realities closer together, creating the right environment for effective and resolute engagement between technicians and leaderships in our institutions. In addition, we will have a space to get closer to our continental and global partners, which are key for the technical and financial support of our operations. I'm talking about multilateral institutions, the French Development Bank, the Global Fund for Cities Development, the Institute for Sustainability Development and Internal Relations, and so many institutions that help us all days. The vision and the role of these institutions will be discussed in our second roundtable today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first step of a long journey. As we finish this event today, we hope to have awakened the interest and willingness of this group to move forward with the works, presenting concrete steps in that direction. That's why we engaged with the Latin America institution, ALID, ABD, and all of our partners present here today. I will close my opening remarks now, and I'd like to thank you very much for having accepted our invitation to be here to you. And I'll hand it back over to Audrey. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for sharing with us your experience at the BDMG Regional Bank. And it's important for all future members and partners of the Alliance that are here today that they are aware of the role of this platform and its main goals. I would just like to say that the General Secretary and the President of Finance Club, Mr. Rémi Rio, was supposed to have made this introduction along with you, Mr. Guzman, but he has been delayed because he had to replace the President of the Republic, Mr. Macron, during an event. So I apologize on his behalf, but he will join us as soon as possible, probably a little later. So I would now like to invite Mr. Jean-François Herbert, Executive Director of FMDV, to start his presentation. Thank you very much. So, good morning. I'm going to make here a presentation that will connect the roundtables, and I will be speaking in English.
About the topics that we are for which we are here today, the challenges of local finance. It's estimated that $90 trillion are needed to be mobilized to meet the urban infrastructure needs within the 15 years, of which only 25% is coming from the public. So there is also what we observe, there is a market failure on municipal finance, meaning that the supply of financing doesn't match with the needs of the cities. And despite the fact that the resources exist and are available, we saw that many credit line and investment facilities have been developed by the DFIs and by the private investors on one side. On the other side, local governments have needs, and each mayors or local elected have projects on this desk, but the two doesn't connect and doesn't match. So the question is, how can we succeed in making supply and demand meet? One of the answers has been raised during the global agenda, and it's the role of the subnational development banks. Over the past 5 years, the SDBs have been recognized as key stakeholders to implement the global agendas and to fill in the urban investment gap. And they have been integrated into the Addis Ababa Action Plan following the Financing for Development Summit in 2015. SDBs have been integrated into the New Urban Agenda following the Habitat 3 in 2016, and they also have been recognized in the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action following the Paris Agreement. And some common understanding around the SDBs. So subnational development banks are public banks that are mandated to provide financing to local and regional governments or private entities for public services provision and infrastructure projects at local level. SDBs, they can act as professional financial intermediaries to catalyze public and private financing and to channel these resources at local level. They act also as transformative instruments for the development of stronger municipal credit markets, especially for medium-sized cities. And SDBs are well-established domestic players closely connected to the national policy and to the objective of development of the countries. So SDB can act as policy and market makers for local development. But what does that mean? Policymakers, meaning to develop and drive national policies aligned with SDBs. SDGs. And so this through contributing to the national planning processes and financing national policies to implement the global agenda, particularly the SDGs at local level, and also by integrating SDGs and the Paris Agreement objectives in their strategies, standards, data, and reporting methodology in their operating procedures. And SDBs can be market players by consolidating the local and urban financial markets, by developing an enabling environment for urban investments, by improving local capacities to formulate investment-worthy projects, by developing strong pipelines of projects, by steering and providing financing, notably through the blended finance, and finally, by partnering with international, national, and private financial institutions. So why developing an alliance of SDBs in Latin America? SDBs are diverse in status, financing models, and source of finance, but they share a common objective, beneficiary, and partners. So the alliance of SDBs in Latin America have different objectives. One is to reinforce capacities to align SDBs investment with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Two, to boost the financial urban markets and develop pipelines of projects. Three, to develop a strategic space for dialogues and partnerships with development finance institutions and with network of local governments. And fourth, to promote the strategic role of SDBs and the contribution of the alliance to the global agendas in international fora. There is another experience of SDB Alliance in Africa that was created in 2014 after the Finance for Development Summit with the support of AFD and FMDV. And today it counts 12 members and is engaged with most of the National Development Bank active in urban investment in Africa. And this alliance in Africa is facilitating different set of activities. It develops regional programs, training, peer-to-peer exchange, and technical assistance to individual SDBs. It facilitates grouped or individual connection with DFIs and network of cities. And it leads advocacy campaign to contribute to the international agendas and increase the recognition of SDBs as key stakeholders. But also the Alliance of Latin America answers the objective of creating a global alliance of SDBs announced during the UNSG Summit, Climate Action Summit in September 2019. So some proposed activities for this year after the launch of the Alliance. The first one will be to structure the Alliance by mobilizing interested SDBs, DFIs, UN agencies, and network of local governments to join the Alliance by signing the declaration that will be circulated. Two, to organize the first meeting of the Alliance on June 23rd, and to organize it as a multi-stakeholder dialogue between SDBs, national and local governments, DFIs, and the private sector, and that will contribute to refine the areas of cooperation and also to design the work plan of the Alliance. Then to launch a study on SDBs in Latin America to better understand the scope of SDBs in the region by mapping the different existing SDBs, their governing structure, their financial maturity, and to identify the urban investment portfolio. That will happen in Q2, and it will be led by AFD. And finally, also to organize the governance modalities of the Alliance, the status of the members, the decision bodies, and etc. And this by the end of the year. In the short term, the declaration of the creation of the Alliance will be communicated for endorsement on the dedicated website. And I think we will share with you the link of it has been shared in the chat. The second set of activities proposed for this year is to define an action plan. And we pre-identified 4 sets of activities. The first one is to develop programs like regional trainings, peer-to-peer exchange, cooperation with partners, DFIs, local governments, and UN agency. Secondly, to develop a common instrument like data collection, standards, project preparation framework, reporting instrument, etc. Third, to develop technical assistance to expand the investment capacity of SDBs and to support the development of pipelines of projects. And finally, some advocacy and promotion activities in the international conferences like the UN agendas and processes that are mentioned here. In the short term, a questionnaire will be sent to open up for recommendations and suggestions to consolidate the action plan to be developed by the end of the year. So that was my presentation. Audrey, back to you. Thank you very much.
Un grand merci, Monsieur le directeur exécutif, pour cette présentation qui nous a apporté les définitions et concepts communs tout à fait indispensables pour nos futurs membres et partenaires de l'Alliance. Je vais maintenant passer...
So thank you very much. And now I'm going to hand the floor over to Sébastien Trian, the Executive Director of IDDR, who will coordinate the first round table. I see. I would like to tell the participants to feel free to write in the chat any interventions or questions that you have, and we will transmit this to the moderators. So once again, thank you very much. Mr. Sébastien Trian, I'll let you introduce your roundtable on SDBs as policy and market makers for local urban transition. I would like to thank all the speakers for being here with us. And we have the participation of Carlos Linares. He was here at our first summit in November, and he shared the joint declaration of SDBs. So, Mr. Trier, I hand it back to you. I'd like to thank you. I'm very happy to be here at this Alliance for Subnational Development Banks in Latin America. And we work with a lot of people with a transformation for sustainability. And so for us, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here. I'd like to invite the panelists to please open your video so we can have this panel. I'm just going to make a few introductory words. As you know, the SDBs are very well positioned to have a critical role to boost changes in the territories, thanks to their closeness to the local reality. A recent study, we saw that there's interest and very good work being done by these banks to go beyond their roles as financiers and to also help with the compliance of policies as the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. And this role also helps with the creation of new markets and local capacity building. In the same way, we also saw in this study that there are a few institutional and financial challenges that make it hard for the SDBs to achieve all these objectives. So if the SDBs want to be part of sustainable development, what this study proposes is that they need to be willing to bet on a true transformation of the practices at all levels, starting with their priorities. And so that's why I think that the goal of this alliance is of mutual learning, and that's something that Jean-Francois mentioned, to empower each of the players and empower these transformative capacities. So during this roundtable, each bank will share the experience and the challenges they have faced to consolidate local financial markets and to develop and boost national policies that are aligned with the SDGs. So I would like, once again, to tell participants to ask your questions in the chat, and then after the initial words by each of the banks, we can have this dialogue with our participants. So now I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have Ms. Eliane Lemos, who is from the president of the extreme south of Brazil. We have Carlos Linares, who's from the Development Bank of Peru, and also president of Elite. We have Sandra Gomes, who is the president of the Territorial Bank of Colombia. And we have also going to see the diversity of how these banks can use the diversity of the experiences to build this learning. We have Veronica from the Guarantee Fund of Buenos Aires and Mr. Valdeci, president of the Amazon Development Bank in Brazil. And so I will start with Ms. Eliane Lemos. I will ask my question in Spanish and I will try and listen to the interpretation in Spanish. So thank you very much for being with us. What was your experience in integrating this agenda, the 2030 and Paris Agreement in your strategies and actions, and how this reflects in the financing plans for the cities?
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, participating in our showing our participation here. We work in 4 Brazilian states, the 3 southern states, plus Mato Grosso do Sul state. It's the 15th strongest Brazilian bank, which in the past few years has made a shift to have better business and to have more capillarity and be more aligned with sustainability. I often say that we have 3 major challenges. One has been mentioned by Jean-François and Sebastian, which is proximity and expertise. And this is key for us to reach different municipalities. In addition to credit, we also offer technical support in analyzing projects, and we are in about 1,000 municipalities, so capillarity. So the funding challenge, and the biggest one, is to find resources that match the projects that are made priorities, and how these projects can be aligned to the 2030 agenda. I would say that we have 3 forms to integrate with the agenda. First, the change for micro, small, and medium companies. We are a project bank. We finance energy and infrastructure, major projects in agribusiness as well. But especially in the last year, we've made an effort to increase by 250% the number of contracts with smaller, micro, and small businesses. So, and it's always funding is always a challenge for this kind of business. And then the second way we can align with the 2030 agenda is through the municipalities. This is a project-based ban whose operation is 95% with the private sector and 5% only with the public sector. In the past few years, we have been trying to work closer to municipalities with a specific agenda. Now, we have multilateral institutions that are helping us raise funds for health cities, for cities interested in becoming smart cities or more friendly cities, and this with sustainability projects. A third way to align with the project is through a project that's been created a few years ago for sustainable production and consumption. 5 years ago, this program represented 5% of our portfolio, and last year it reached 17%. So that's roughly $500 million. And our focus is energy, renewable energy and energy efficiency. So we work with low carbon agriculture and sustainable use of water. And this was the most important program in our portfolio last year. Recently, we approved the financing for a forest-related project, which is something we're very proud of. Fourth way to align with the agenda is in regards to gender. In March, we've just launched a program for the Southern female entrepreneurs. We use part of our resources to encourage female entrepreneur here. We know there's a great gap of credit for women globally. So this is an opportunity for us to address the 2030 agenda and causing positive impact. And fifth is the increase in investment and increase our investment in technology, startups namely. We have a project in 3 of the states where we work to accelerate startups. And in addition to that, we invest in funds that also invest in technology. And by doing this, we feed into the ecosystem in the southern region of Brazil. So I believe that this is how we intend to work, use our projects, our lines of credits, and our national and international partnerships to be able to fulfill our mission. Thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica. You gave us some very interesting details as to how the integration with the 2030 agenda will be made. Now, I would like to call Mr. Carlos Linares. He is the president of Allied. And my question is, considering the problems in the region, what are the major difficulties and challenges faced by subnational development banks to participate in public policies based on a standpoint considered in the bank you lead and also in the Allied Association? So what are these challenges and how can we help make subnational banks fulfill their role and serve the 2030 agenda? So, Mr. Linares, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation, to thank BDMG. And also we had the Finance in Common and the launch of this alliance of subnational development bank. As for the question that's being debated here, we are actually a national development bank from Peru. And this is a 50-year-old institution. And throughout our history, we have contributed a lot to local development. However, all the development institutions at subnational level must reinvent themselves, actually, whether it's subnational or national level, because the surrounding environment is always changing. Especially in the last time this has happened in a very fast and even dramatic way. So we need to reinvent ourselves, not only through new challenges and seeing the issues, but the changes in the environment, in the market, what's happening in nature itself, including climate change. And we need to identify the needs of the country, its people, and the businesses. So there's this constant quest to meet the needs, which requires us to review our strategies and be sure that our products and services are proper for the current markets. And under the Paris Agreement, development institutions have a very important role, not only to channel resources, but also channel technical assistance. To do that, it's important to have permanent contact with multilateral organizations that can give us their know-how and share their experiences in other countries, and also help us have competitive rates for the market. We also have an important role to develop public policies, and there's a need to work as an articulator between the national and local governments so that the priority can be given to certain projects and structure the financing necessary for us to achieve the commitments to reduce emissions. For example, we know the commitments that we have require important investments, not just at a national level, but by the whole region. And we know that the governments can't finance all of this themselves. So we need the private sector to be there with us. And we have this important role as development institutions to articulate this participation through competitive resources and seeking mechanisms to facilitate this intervention in terms of competitive rates and terms, and to show the gains that will happen with these projects. I can give an example that we have been working for a while with renewable energy projects. In Lima, we are financing the transit system that uses natural gas. So we have a wave of financial and sustainable finances with this. We are working with multilateral organizations, especially to meet the regional development needs, so that we can identify potential productive chains and apply these concepts so that we can facilitate not just financing, but also technical assistance to improve productivity and efficiency. We are also financing an electromobility program. So this would be using renewable electrical energy in public mobility. We are working in projects with OECD to generate these clean energies in our country. So we're always reviewing our strategic plan and incorporating what is necessary in terms of economic and social needs. To do this, it's important to have this exchange of ideas and experiences and this new way of collaboration between the SDBs and the agencies. Thank you very much, Mr. Linares. I would like to know how this alliance, why this alliance of SDBs is so important. You were very clear with that, and it's important for us to count with all levels of institutions involved. So thank you very much for your words. And now we are going to go to Sandra Gomez, who is the president of the Territorial Development Bank of Colombia. What do you think is the possibility of diversifying alliances and sources of financing to connect the local needs to these broader agendas?
Desde Findeter, pues somos la banca de desarrollo.
Hello, Sebastian. Thank you very much for having me here. We are the Colombian Development Bank. We have 4 development banks in Colombia, one dedicated to agribusiness, a second one dedicated to micro and small companies, the other one trade and infrastructure, and we are focused on everything related to infrastructure in the medium and high level 4 regions. We have a very important purpose, and we support the regions where we work to try and recover the economy from COVID. Of course, a lot of the municipalities lost a lot of resources coming from taxes because the economic activity reduced so drastically, and also the purchase power of companies and individuals has decreased a lot. So our focus was put in some specific lines to try to boost economic activity. And since last year, we have been working on that. Before the beginning of the pandemic, so through a fund called Fundetec, we have subsidies to provide loans for territories. And through this program, we are able to provide financial resources to other banks who work with retail. And with this better interest rate, these institutions have managed to gain some advantages. These are institutions that are not likely to have such low interest rate at the long term, and therefore they can boost loans. After the beginning of the pandemic, we did take measures to try to favor these retail banks with interest rates subsidized by the government. We have credit lines, some of which are specific for direct loans and businessmen, and some others that have some subsidies and the rates itself. So the final percentage of this rate make these lines of credit or loan lines very important. So we have over roughly $1 million. Sorry, I corrected myself, a little bit less than that. But anyway, we have been able to work on this special interests for the territories, especially for projects related to infrastructure that might generate direct and indirect employment, and that can also help the economic recovery in our region. We have important lines of credit also for the private sector so that they also can resume and help the economic recovery. So they are great drivers of this theme at this moment. In addition to that, we have had some discussions with some of our partners because a major issue we face, or a major gap we have in territorial entities, was related to the proper design of projects. We perceived that the capacity of some regions to develop and structure projects was not very high, and the cost of agreements for new institutions to make these projects viable was not that simple. So the projects would come to a stalemate. So today, what we have is we're able to work with less privileged municipalities, so they have less resources, so they are put in a different category, and we are able to subsidize projects totally or partially to help them structure these projects so they can get funds themselves. We have helped about 800 municipalities in an indirect way. But mainly, we are working not only with credit resources, but also with the support to provide a structured project, and finally to execute these projects. So we finance these well-structured projects, and we will also oversee that these works are executed. So this is all done in a very transparent fashion with very transparent rules. We also ensure that resources are executed with the resources available. So it's not, so there's no room for corruption to happen. We want the execution of these projects to be done as properly as possible. We have great relationship with the governments, on the other hand, and we contribute to the infrastructure of the territories through our bank, and also considering the capacity of each one of the municipalities. We cannot be there providing structure at all the time, but our idea is also to teach them, develop these capacities so they can do that in the future by themselves. Great. That's very interesting, the way you work both on national and local level in Colombia. That is quite interesting. Now we are going to listen to Mr. Alamton from Mexico, from the Agricultural Development Fund, Mr. Alan Flores, and I'd like to know how it was their offer to boost the sustainable development in the agricultural system, and even in a broader sphere, so to speak.
Impulsado su fondo el desarrollo sostenible en el espacio urbano.
The agricultural sector had to rely on this boosting and these incentives. Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, to be able to share a case of our institution here. First and foremost, I'd like to celebrate the objective that we have in our region regarding the experiences that we have. Similar experiences in terms of development. It's not that difficult to compare. We see the relationship between our purpose and cities development as something very direct. So I will mention what I saw in the report issued by the World Bank now, the effects of sustainable development in the agricultural sector. I see that the agriculture and food sector have a major importance in economic growth, but also it plays an important role in the recovery post-pandemic. We see that the agriculture and food sectors are developed. We have stronger cycles here, and this is replicated to other sectors working in urban centers.
The agro sector also has a lot of influence in fighting poverty. I don't think I need to emphasize also the influence in the urban sector. We speak of migrations, If we fail in the development of the sector, then we'll have less jobs, less opportunities, and also more people moving to the cities. So that's why it's important to invest in food, nutrition, and agriculture. This is very important in terms of public health, but also for the population to develop itself satisfactorily with food safety. And we would have a strong commitment for human development. And I think the main thing is the importance of the agricultural sector in the environment itself. We may think that the urban sector is highly pollutant, but when we look at the statistics of greenhouse gas emissions and water use, we can see that the rural sector has a strong influence in terms of its impact on the environment. And so this impact on the environment also has impact on food production. So we believe that this also has an indirect impact on the urban development, and we think it's different sides of the same issue. So we would like to go to a part of your question that says, how did we create a strategy that is, how do we align our strategies and procedure with the 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement? Well, we are an institution, what we call a second level institution. So we work through intermediaries and we provide resources to small farmers and also large farmers that are important exporters in our country. And so we work with short-term and long-term credit facilities, and we create a strategy that are aligned with the SDGs. And one of the priority is to finance and to improve product efficiency and also to improve productivity. I would like to highlight that we have developed a three-pillar strategy to promote in our sector the awareness with the ecosystem and social responsibility within the activities. So the first is our institution does not do any harm to the environment. We have adopted methodologies that are aligned with the Equator Principles to measure our impact on the environment and establishing mitigating actions. We have over $10 million in credit for this purpose. Another pillar that we are seeking to develop is positive impact on the environment. So we have aligned our instruments, our guarantees for certain subsidies to promote investment concepts related to energy efficiency, reduction of water use, and environmental friendly agriculture. This is a project that has been in progress for the past 2 to 3 years, and we are involving third parties in this agenda. So we work with certain tags, what we call tags, and we use the green tag, green labels, and we grant credit provided they don't harm the environment, for example. We do face challenges, however. We can't say that these bonds that we use with, which we are calling green bonds, there's still a lot of work and the cost is the same. So there's still some work to be there. So the role of the development bank is balancing this out. That's what we're been doing, and it's what we have to do. So these green bonds allow us to do this, and now we're also have social bonds. And we need to say that these are initiatives that can only be replicated in a country because we have horizontal participation. Because we are a second level institution, we have a lot of capillarity, over 65% in rural financing. And that's why we were able to create standards to promote these principles. If we were just one sole institution, then it would be very hard to apply these policies in the rural sector. So I would like to finish by thanking you for this opportunity to share my experience in such an important forum. Thank you very much. That was a perfect example of how interactivity between banks and other institutions can help with our development. I'm sorry that I had to cut everyone a bit short, but we are a little bit behind on our agenda. And I just want to make sure that we remain on time. So now I would like to speak to Ms. Veronica Benchberg and to know how this alliance can help develop it and achieve the objectives. Well, first of all, I would like to thank everyone for the invitation to be here. We have a big challenge at our bank and for Argentina in general. We are working with this issue of the commitment in terms of production. So we need to have a balance with their environment and also with social responsibility. And so we have short and medium term strategies to meet the SDGs. This is very complex. And the Buenos Aires Guarantee Fund works along with small businesses, thinking of investment in industry, trade, and services. And the SMEs represent over 60% of the production, employ 9 million people. And so that's almost 70% of formal employment in Argentina. So in this sense, we have a key role to reduce financing for production, especially sustainable development at the urban level. So during 2020, the bank's new management, we saw an increase in 60% to SMEs in comparison to 2019. So this year, we're going more in depth to increase these numbers and to ensure that they get assistance. And we want these sums to go beyond what we're looking for. So we need to align the SDGs to technological development to improve industrial production and to decrease risks and also to meet social and environmental goals. And we try to develop industries in all the territory of Buenos Aires. We have companies that create sustainability projects with the help of our fund to improve the public policies implemented. We also work with the value chains of big companies that require financing and we provide technical assistance and promote development. That's why it's very important to define the factors required to adopt environmental characteristics. And we articulate our work with several other banks, such as the Province Bank of Buenos Aires, the Nación Bank, and other public banks from Argentina. They are our main collaborators, and we create credit lines, especially now that we've created, especially during the pandemic. And so we have United Credit. We have a fund for technological innovation, for Industry 4.0, and environmental management will reduce impacts to society. So we need to create a strategic space, such as the ones being created in this meeting. This will allow us to think of other initiatives and create portfolios with sustainable goals. So the alliance will allow us to have more efficiency and access to resources so that we create a sustainable region. We need to understand how to be sustainable and to increase access to these resources. We would need to monitor the projects that create more sustainable works. Thank you. That was very interesting. And now I hand it over to the president of the Bank of Amazon, Mr. Valdeci José. Jose, can you share with us your recent experience in creating an alliance for development in the Amazon, and also how to do it according to the best practices in the financial market?
Thank you very much once again for your invitation. We are at a very complex area. In fact, if we think about risks, and especially bank risks, we are a development bank. We work with long-term, with subsidized resources in a complex region with a lot of risks, not only environmental, but also social. So it's very important to have discipline and find the best model that provides balance between economic development, income development, and the social development of the situation with the environment and the climate aspects. So we have some partnerships that we started with the IFC last year to review our social environmental responsibility policy to verify the international standards that can be used and how we could adapt that to our local reality, which is very different. The Amazon itself is very diversified. In each different area of the Amazon, in different states, you have different realities. And we also have a partnership with the IDB that's just starting to assess our products and also to create a green opportunity bank. So which are the opportunities that the Amazon has for entrepreneurs around the world, and trying to draw these entrepreneurs to the sustainable opportunities. This is a joint work, and the Amazon Bank also started working as a level 2 bank. We have an institutional fund, a strong fund. We have 36 billion reais today. This is roughly 6.5 billion American dollars. Yesterday, we had about $2 billion applied in the Amazon. 30% of which represented resources for infrastructure, and the remaining industry, retail, and agribusiness. We also established some partnerships with some states and local administrations to foster sustainable activities. As we are a level 2 bank, we also transfer these banks to corporate, state, and fostering agencies. So to try to make the 2030 objectives practical, what we've been trying to do to include the agenda in our is to include these objectives in the bank's own agenda. So this is protected, therefore, due to our governance structure. We are a state-owned bank, but we have an independence governance. We have 5 independent board members. So we have a governance structure that was created for planning to be made in the long term and not changed as governments are no longer in office. This protects the institution and protects these partnerships, leading to credibility, which is necessary for us to draw all of the stakeholders to cooperate in such a complex area such as the Amazon. Thank you, Mr. Tolse. I'm sorry to say that we don't have time for a Q&A. So I'd like to propose the following. Some questions are specifically directed for our speakers. We have questions for Sandra, for Mr. Carlos, and other questions as well. So if you can please answer these questions on the chat box directly, each one of the speakers, please do so. We'd appreciate that. Unfortunately, we have very interesting questions, but we do not have time for that. We need to be talking about the SDGs regarding the new economic order, and we need to be discussing the other aspects now. So I'd like to thank you all for what you came here to say today. These banks have expertise, knowledge, they know how to implement projects, and this is very important. And it's very important that they buy in and the changes that are happening, and they help in the ecosystem, which includes subnational banks. I apologize for not having time for the Q&A. I will get back to Andre, and she can once again mediate the meeting, this meeting today. Thank you very much, all speakers, all panelists here, for coming to share all of your experiences here with us today. Thank you very much for bringing so much knowledge to us today. I'd now like to call Mrs. Emilia Saiz. She is the Secretary General of the United Cities and Local Government, the UCLG. She's representing the local and regional governments and the associations of Latin America. These associations are somehow part of the face of the banks, of the regional banks and subnational banks as well. So can you talk about the aspirations of that you have nowadays? Well, thank you very much for having invited me to be here. This is such a great initiative to have an alliance of subnational development banks in Latin America and the Caribbean. This comes at a very important time, in my opinion, and I'm very happy to see that we are celebrating the Finance in Common Summit that we had in November last year. Now, considering the perspective of our own members, in addition to the specific cases that have been mentioned so far, I'd like to say that our members all have their own specificities, and I'd like to bring a more general overview here on the expectations, the desires, and what we think can be articulated in this alliance. Now, if we stop to take notice, we see this is a very important moment we are living. It is a moment that we are uh, starting over with great concerns, expectations, and hope as well. This is a time when our audience has taken a leading role here, which is much more relevant than that was given to them in the two past decades. They We have to work with the audiences to drive development. On the other hand, another major concern, and I'm sure it's not for me, but for many of the members here, a big concern is that we haven't yet paid specific attention to to the development agendas in the local level. When I heard the presentations then before, I'm filled with hope. But I also ask myself, why haven't we been able to reach the transformation level we all want to reach? So we have the report of the United Nations on city development has been recently issued. And this report shows that there's a perception that cities, states, and countries can focus on local aspects. And we do have projects financed by subnational banks that consist great examples of this approach. On the other hand, I believe we can also approach or address some specific issues regarding the models used to transfer tax resources, for instance, fundraising models or funding models in territories. This needs to be clear. And we can say that this safety is necessary because let's think about the post-pandemic era. We will have to change the kind of project that is funded. We will see a great gap on local public services. So, and by that, I'm not talking about major infrastructure works only. I'm talking, which before the COVID were more typically funded, but I'm talking about social infrastructure here. And this is something that the UN report emphasizes, financing for development. So the report also emphasizes that we will have to change the type of investment and that essential services will be very important, especially when it comes to social articulation. And this is somehow our concern, because in this big major group of in this major gap in offer and supply here impacts all of the stakeholders mentioned by our previous speakers here. We have Jean Allen talking about this very well when it comes to city development. So we have a number of projects locally or on a state level that aren't getting funded. So I believe that this kind of project and demand for this kind of project and service will increase in the post-pandemic era. So these basic public services will have to be revisited. we will need to rethink about our essentials. And I believe that the global agendas, and most specifically the Paris Agreement, which is a reference to everyone, will have to be revisited, so to speak. These are very important milestones. We need to think this on a more localized approach to have new social contracts that will promote the transformation in these models. This is certainly going to happen, but we'll certainly have to think about which axis can articulate this transformation and which areas we will need to focus our investments on. To me, a clear area that will require more investments are basic services, and especially the ones that provide support to healthcare, care, equality. Initiatives related to this kind of topic are hardly ever articulated in more concrete and attractive projects that would somehow have investments. So we believe that the alliance will serve as a space for us to exchange experience, not only among banks, but with our stakeholders and governments that need to change the way they are debating things. I believe that this is a lot of what the alliance is about. If we look at the two past decades, the alignment between what is considered important as an investment made by these banks is something that has bettered a lot, so to speak. We do have our own agendas when it comes to transformation, but I still think there is a lack as to how this is translated locally based on a political perspective. This is not necessarily articulated on the regional and national level as you described. So we believe that the alliance can serve as a space for this kind of dialogue. So that is also why we hope that we can be included in these dialogues and that you join us in other dialogues we are currently establishing. It's essential that subnational development banks and national development banks that have such a great financing capacity and knowledge of territories keep an open door. And it's very important to include some types of policies in their approach. And it's also important to change the way SPDs talk to territories, considering a more holistic and regional meeting. For instance, the Latin American metropolitan agenda needs to be revised and circulated in intermediate cities in Latin America rather than only in major cities. So intermediate cities also have to receive more attention and funding. That's why, for us, it's important that our actions, expertise can participate. Our doors are open for you, so we can talk to all of these stakeholders. And all of the efforts we make locally with volunteer reports, with local subnational reports, these reports are produced on an annual basis for the high-level political forum of the UN. So these reports could be a great starting point to start dialoguing with you and to start aligning policies in a more effective way. And in the voluntary local reviews, we can find very important examples of how some people are articulating policies for the future. I hope we have the opportunity to discuss this with you in the near future. Thank you very much for inviting us here, and I'm very happy to have all of you here discussing all of these aspects.
Thank you very much. Uh, we want to thank
tout en faisant face à des priorités de court terme induites par la crise qui est sanitaire
and short term.
et qu'ils ont à gérer localement. L'Alliance sera certainement utile pour consolider ce pont nécessaire entre les banques des territoires et les collectivités locales. Un autre
So
indispensable de l'Alliance est l'échelon national.
we have a partnership
Le dialogue entre les banques de territoire et les collectivités locales est en réalité souvent, comment dire,
to have this dialogue between the territories.
nationaux s'impliquent fortement. Pour illustrer ce rôle, Madame Rebecca Greenspan, secrétaire générale.
So we're going to illustrate this role. We are going to invite Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of the Ibero-American General Secretariat. So, Miss Rebecca Greenspan, thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Audrey. Let me open here. So thank you very much. Especially Sergio Guzmão, thank you very much. I agree with everything that you said. It was all very inspiring. All of you that are here with us, celebrating this alliance that we're creating today, this alliance of Subnational Development Bank, and it brings a number of promises to Latin America with all these challenges that we have ahead of us, with all the context that we have. And this alliance that shows our capacity of collaboration, especially at a regional and sub-regional level, which is so necessary, as Emilia just said. We speak a lot of multilateralism, a network of multilateral organizations, and that's how we need to speak in this century. It's a different type of multilateral work. And what I'm going to say here is to show how this is key. And I think this alliance is a great way to do this, and we need to celebrate this multilateral. And I just want to make sure I remain on time. How long do I have? About 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, so I'm not going to have a keynote speech. Okay, it's just a quick intervention. That's fine. I'm going to try and resume in this short time what I have, maybe just a few messages. The first is that this pandemic has shown us that when we believed that we had all the answers, then the questions were completely changed. And so now we are seeing the dawn of a new time, and we need to decide if this is going to be a time where we are going to recover, but with more inequality in all sense, so more gender inequality, social and economic inequality, territorial inequality, or if we are going to find a new model for development. That is the key question for the post-pandemic. We can recover and not go to a better place. Everything that we saw in the previous panel, and as Emilia said, we need to have a new development model that meets the sustainable development goals. We need to have a greener recovery that's inclusive, because what has happened with the pandemic is that we've seen that the structural deficits that we were not able to solve in the 20th century, well, the pandemic made these issues even more serious. So we have the infrastructure along with the situation, and now it's not just about leaving the situation behind, but overcoming these structural deficits. If we only have a short-term view, we will make mistakes in our policies that we create to leave the pandemic. We need to have long-term goals. And we won't reach the new normal. Well, maybe a new normal, but not a better normal. If our recovery has more inequality and poverty, then that is not a good recovery. We need to think beyond this recovery. And that's where the SDBs come in. We have a very important role in our countries. The SDBs can play an important role in this challenge of coordination that we have. First of all, the SDBs can act as experts. They can help take that last step, the ones that the other national instruments can't. As Emilia said, we know that the SDGs can only be achieved if we have the subnational level working towards that. We need the local governments. And we're not just talking about the big cities, but also medium cities. And those are the basis of our urban structures in Latin America. Here, 80% of the population, of Latin American population, live in cities. And the SDBs reach territories that are often ignored, and also businesses that other players cannot reach. So the SDBs can reach the hardest places, the SMEs, rural activities, informal market, and fill the gender gap, which has increased enormously with the pandemic. So we believe that this network of SDBs is key if we want to build this foundational multilateralism that can promote new public policy that will indeed promote change. So we need new forms of financing for the SDBs. Most of them were created over the past 2 decades, and we need to strengthen them and have standards and impact measurements to empower these SDBs so that there will be this agent of transformation that we need at local and regional level. Often, the new SDBs do not have internal infrastructure to create regulatory framework when we have these new financial instruments, such as the green bonds, and now we need to have gender bonds. So it's these new mechanisms to deal with inequalities and to help the SMEs. So this networks help us share knowledge and share experiences. And I would like to finish by saying that the general Iberoamerican General Secretariat loves to work and network in multi-stakeholder ways. And that's where many of our achievements have come during our pandemic. It's through the networks that we have. We have a network of local institutionals, our work with local governments in the cities. So I'm happy to say that when we have the alliance, that the Alliance of Subnational Development Banks is not alone. We also have our network, Ibero-American network. We have a citizenship network, and I invited the SDBs to create this new economy, a new conception of development, and play a key role in the recovery agenda and in the 2030 agenda. This alliance is a great step in this direction. And I must say, it's a great pleasure to be here sharing with you this achievement and celebrating this alliance. And you can count on us. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Secrétaire Générale, pour votre immense enthousiasme pour l'Alliance.
Thank you so much, Madam Garcia. It was so great to have such nice clarification regarding national and the subnational banks and the global agenda. This is so paramount. So the first roundtable allowed the subnational banks to express themselves here, and we had great presentations by them. But now it's time to go to our roundtable number 2. We have European and local partners that came here to express their point of view with us. We have Mrs. Emilia Mahira, FMDV Deputy Executive Director, to introduce this roundtable. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here to welcome our colleagues here to discuss and try to reinforce our partnerships with subnational development BUS that to finance urban and territorial development. In the first roundtable, we saw that SBDs can fill gaps in the financial market regarding city financing due to their role the role that they play in many aspects, especially in intermediate cities and in the formation portfolio, so to speak. To do that, SBDs need to develop interactions between different levels of development banks, that is national, multilateral, and subnational, national, to create ways to interact with cities, especially intermediate cities, or rather including them. So the idea is to guarantee the sovereignty to risk and private investment to allow for long-term investment and on the local level. So I'm very happy to welcome the representatives of these regional and multilateral banks that work with subnational development banks in each one of the regions. So we have Monsieur Georges Labert. He's the Vice President for the private sector for the Corporación Antigua de Fomento. We have Jorge Cabrera, Head of South American and Regional Operations Unit for the European Commission in the Directorate of International Partnerships. We have Mr. Dante Mousel, President of the Central American Bank of Economic Integration. We have Mr. Moises Schwartz, Manager of Institutions and the IDB, and Mr. David Sislin, Practice Manager, Urban and Disaster Risk Management in Latin America and the Caribbean for the World Bank. So we have a panel of financing and development professionals that work with local communities and also with subnational development banks. I will ask them to use the few minutes we have to share their experience and recommendations about a number of questions here. So I will give the floor to each one of you at different moments. And the first question is, how can our technical and financial partners reinforce cooperation with subnational banks to have diversified investments and with technical services to finance local governments to implement technical and financial tools? The second system is how to support subnational banks to structure project portfolios. I know there is a gap of projects considered for loans. So how can we strengthen subnational banks to make these projects possible? And the third question is how can we support subnational banks to provide strategies in balance with the development standards? And finally, what are the future of the alliance? I will first call Mr. Juan Notaro. He is president of the Fomplata Development Bank, and I will ask him to intervene, to make his presentation now.
Okay, so
Thank you
thank you
very
very
much.
much.
I'd like to thank you for your initiative. And this initiative started in the as the Alliance committee was created in Latin America. This is essential for the development of our region. And I'd like to I thank my colleagues, Sergio and Miniani, to have invited me to be here today. So I'll be answering the fourth question you made, Dan, in reference to the priority activities of subnational development banks. Some, for some years, the world has had an ambitious list of goals for mankind, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Despite the advances, which happened at a more intense or less intense area depending on different countries, the year of 2020 and the pandemic especially showed that we can work together to build a more just, solidary, and sustainable world. And this is pretty much what Mrs. Rebecca Spritzman mentioned. The final statement of the Finance in Common Summit mentioned that the post-COVID world requires a shift in paradigm so that recovery can be resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. Considering this vision for the future, all of the institutions are committed to jointly support issues related to climate change to fulfill the goals that have been set. And when it comes to international financing, the Alliance is an important first step to be able to provide recovery post-pandemic. As banks, we can provide funding in situations which are not profitable for other institutions. This is a commitment we have, and that is a purpose of our institutions here. In this case, the idea of the alliance is to support subnational development banks and other institutions to give them the instruments required to fulfill these goals. That being said, considering this context, and I can say that we see at least 4 priority activities to strengthen actions before development banks. On the one hand, it's necessary to establish institution and financial bonds that are long-term, that will not end as this and that government no longer in office. The idea is to have common strategy that consider the medium and long terms in regards to the sustainable objectives, climate and environment. A second priority would be to improve coordination when it comes to different agendas and banks operating in the same region. The idea of this better coordination would be to reduce costs and time for subnational development banks, both for financing, but also for technical cooperation. Thirdly, I also believe that we have to promote and articulate capacity building and best practices. FEMPLATA, more specifically, is very much interested to applying international development practices, but we're also interested to learn about local knowledge and therefore apply it to our development bank. More often than not, institutions are introduced to external visions that are not necessarily applicable to local realities. That being said, we have to say that a lot of the experience we have in the 5 countries we are present, specifically in Brazil, in the emblematic project we have with the BDMG, gives us a very rich set of body of knowledge, so to speak. And I believe the international agencies and subnational banks can work jointly to even further better that. The last point would be the search for innovation to face the challenges ahead of us. This includes support and financial aspects, up to mechanisms that will allow us to share risks, guarantees, instruments that somehow can better the results of traditional funding, for instance. So in summary, strategy, qualification, best practices, and innovation with agility and focus on the long term, especially that will be there once a president, a governor changes. This is very important. So consensus between all of these stakeholders is very important for the future of the alliance and for the development of our nation. As a development bank, we are solidary. And FEMPLATA has not only a commitment, but an obligation to coordinate efforts to continue supporting the recovery of our country. FEMPLATA will walk the extra mile to be more effective as soon as possible so we can go back to normal the sooner the better. And in addition to bringing development, we will also work to provide growth and employment in 2021 for our population. So there's politics, there are ideologies, but if we can work together, I'm sure that the fate of our regions will be of hope and progress. Thank you very much.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur Notaro. Je rappelle que vous avez commencé récemment à travailler plus avec les collectivités locales et avec les banques de territoire.
Thank you very much for that.
Votre engagement et on attend voilà, beaucoup de votre engagement dans l'Alliance. Je souhaiterais maintenant passer la parole à Monsieur Dante Mossi.
So now I'm going to pass the floor to Mr. Dante Mossi, who is the president of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. Hello, good morning. Thank you, everyone. All our colleagues that are here. It's good to see all these important development banks here. And this type of development is key for us to see the lessons learned in each region. I think it's very important for us to have funds to promote these local projects. So we need to have resources for these to be feasible. And this has to work in contingency with the cities. So when a project isn't feasible, the bank can promote its own studies. If the project is successful, then we can add the cost of that study to the project. So our fund has been very successful, and the European Union has joined us to give us possibilities for many institutions that were seeking to solve the problems of the cities. And I'm very pleased to be able to talk about these themes, which are very important, and we need to find a solution for them. Our region is being impacted by climate change beyond our emissions. We received, for example, last year, we received 2 level 5 hurricanes. And the presidents of our country got together to think about how to get more credit to solve these problems, because we're still paying off other debts. So we need to find a solution for this. And we need resources. There are many interesting long-term projects for climate change. And the issue is not just the fund. These funds must solve the problem. So we are very pleased to be part of an alliance with places that may have found solutions. For example, we have electrical mobility. We know that the transportation sector is responsible for many emissions. And so maybe we need to promote plans to finance electric vehicles. When we have resources, it's not always easy to find companies in Latin America that can sell electrical buses and large vehicles to replace traditional fossil fuel vehicles. So we believe we can work together with banks that are already seeing this change in their territories and work together where this is possible. We do have a lot of challenges ahead, and each one needs to do their role. And I would like to say that there is a lot of local innovation going on. But many of these projects require cities to have cash flow in their local currency. And what we are looking for is to finance, to provide funds in this local currency. And at last but not least, we are going through a moment of crisis, and all our member countries are looking for innovations. And there's a lot of private-public partnerships models that need to happen, and they need to be part of the solution and not the problem. So we are looking to the private sector as an additional partner to help solve these problems. And I have to say that the importance of working with collaborators that already have a vision for the post-pandemic. We are looking to have a vaccine factory, for example, for Central America. And I won't go into the details right now because it would take right now, but we are looking to work in sectors where banks normally wouldn't. But this is important for the medium and the long term, but also for short-term solutions. So this is what I'd like to end by saying, that we are committed to financing COVID vaccines, and we are also looking to achieve the SDGs. And just once again, thank the opportunity to be here, and I'm available to answer any questions that may appear. Thank you very much, Mr. Mossi. Unfortunately, we're short on time. I don't think we will have time for Q&A, and I'm going to ask our next speaker to be as brief as possible. And you said of the SDBs being able to prepare projects with their knowledge on the territories and also to finance projects in local currency. So that is very important. Thank you very much for intervention. And now I want to hand the floor to Jorge Sabah Arabash. He's the Vice President for Private Sector of CAF, so the Corporación Andina de Fomento. And the floor is yours. So, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be launching this with a focus on the interests. And I want to make a special thank you for this invitation, especially Sergio Guzmão. CAFI has a long tradition of working with cities and states in Latin America. And we have a special interest of working in the last mile. And that's why we have this interest in subnational. We have in our portfolio several subnational projects, and we have 3 major projects that integrate operations at a subnational level. One is known as Cities of the Future. The other is a project related to water. And the last one is one known as logistic corridors. And these projects are very important because they organize a platform and they are part of a set of interventions where we've had some very successful results. In the case of Brazil, I can say of the set of interventions that happened in the metropolitan region of São Paulo, where we have several municipalities working with CAF in these projects. Given our focus of CAF to be known as a bank of the cities, it's very natural for us to work with the SDBs, and that's what we've been doing for quite some time. And that has increased over the recent years. We understand that sub-national development bank can execute operations aiming at this last mile. So with this in mind, we have developed dozens of operations, including with some of the banks that are here at this event. Recently, because of the pandemic, which is of key importance, of course, we created a special credit facility, and our focus has been to work with the best partners towards that purpose, which are the SDBs. So this credit facility has $1.6 billion, aiming to identify projects that will have impact on people's lives, on businesses, on the reality of those that are part of the communities. So we have non-revolving and non-guaranteed credit facilities, bonds, and several other types of operations. And I have to highlight that because of the pandemic, we have been focusing on actions, for example, in SMEs and meeting the priorities of the cities, including small cities, with regard to their emergency needs. So that's important to mention. Something important also from this credit facility are related to health issues. And something else that's quite important is the institutional strengthening of the SDBs. So that's part of this facility. CAF has a tradition of contributing to the sub-national development banks. We have a long history of such contributions in the digital transformation of these banks and training and capacity building of SDBs. Including also online training for thousands of workers of the SDBs. So this credit line has allowed us to have many collaborators and partners with SDBs and a portfolio that will probably increase throughout this year as the pandemic continues to increase in severity here in the region. And CAF has also paid a lot of attention to micro financial institutions that act at a local level. Because beyond the SDBs, these microfinancial institutions can act at critical issue, which is financial inclusion in terms of gender and also other groups. So for that, CAF has a credit facility of $110 million with a special focus of recover for post-pandemic recovery. So I've talked about resources, guarantees. We also have recommendations in addition to ones that have already been mentioned and we agreed. So it's about creating platforms and predefined programs that may be a useful instrument so that the SDBs and microfinancial institutions can move forward. Pre-feasibility funds that we are developing in CAF, the issue of local currency as mentioned, corporate governance, and something that is key to banks such as CAF is mobilization and capitalization of the resources. So our capacity of intervention and making a difference goes through this capacity of uniting these financial resources, but also this ability to articulate and coordinate the agendas. So thank you very much.
Merci infiniment pour votre intervention. Je retiens quelques points. La capacité des
Obrigada pela
sur
sua
1 km
intervenção. Thank you for your intervention.
capacité de mobilisation donc du rôle
It's great to see that we have the capacity to mobilize this and
développer en fait un renforcement
ability to respond to the crisis with the help of this subnational development banks. So we are able to provide platforms to address the needs of local communities. So I thank you very much. We are a bit behind the schedule here. I will have Mr. George Cabralera now. He is the head of the South America and Regional Operations Units in the European Unit. I'm very honored to be here with you. Good morning, everyone in Latin America. Let me go straight to the point here. In this matter, the European Union uses the very specific mechanism. So we have the financial institutions on one side and the union on the other. So this mix is a catalyst of interventions in the public and private sectors. The idea is to support investment on the national and subnational levels. We are very open to this. This is something that we already do. We are already associated with this kind of blending activity with European institutions, the AFD, the German agencies, the Spanish agencies, and other development banks such as the IDB, the CAF. We are certificated to work with funds that work with resources from the European Union. In Latin America, I'm sure you are familiar with the projects that we have been supporting with governments. So, and in partnership with development banks. I would just like to mention some examples here. We have, for example, provided technical support regarding climate change with Plata. We also have projects with the Papa Bank as well. So we have a number of projects in Central America and Latin America. We have housing funds in Peru for sustainable homes, and we also have projects of sustainable cities with AFD in Colombia. We also have some residue-related projects in other areas in Latin America. I'd also like to mention that most of these examples I've just mentioned rely on the participation of subnational and national development banks as affiliated partners. That would be what we refer to as second branding level project. We do have more opportunities, but despite all these opportunities, we have had a few on the countryside. We are very much interested in doing that. This is a very interesting panel for us because of its potential. And to put it very plainly, I can say that we are going to commit ourselves to face this challenge together with you. We will be focused on implementing the Green Pact, which is a priority for the European Union. In addition to that, as much as possible, we are going to make a proposal for a sustainable world. All of these themes are very important in Latin America, but they have a great local dimension. So the topics we're discussing here today are completely relevant. Now, on the other hand, as my colleagues who've spoken before me have mentioned, we cannot forget the joint efforts we're making to finally end this crisis that has been put in place because of the pandemic. So we want to build better, we want to build greener based on our social pacts. So it is a challenge that it's very important in modern times. In closing, as you know, the European Union has just issued a new budgetary regulation for the next few years, providing new instruments through the Sustainable Development Fund. So these mechanisms allow us that guarantees governments, subnational institutions, and the private sector will be stronger. This regulation is supported by the new European budgetary rules. We will have informative sections on this matter, and you will all be made aware of this to participate so we can rely on your participation there. Once again, I'd like to thank you very much for all the work, this joint work that you did to put this together. And thank you very much.
Donc, comme vous l'avez dit, cette alliance finalement,
Thank you very much.
des agendas, ça sera aussi l'opportunité de développer des nouvelles coopérations
I
entre les différents niveaux de banques.
I enjoyed that to hear about this issue of the cooperation of the banks. And I think this dialogue will allow us to create financial guidelines between the institutions and the SDBs. And I have a lot of hope of this partnership with the European Union to reinforce the financing of this. So now I want to hand the floor over to David Sisland, the Practice Manager, Urban and Disaster Risk Management for the Latin America and the Caribbean World Bank. Bom, eu vou falar em inglês.
I first wanted to just, repeat what so many of others said, to thank both AFD and FMDB for setting up this space. It really is an incredible opportunity for us. Those of us that believe that financial intermediaries, the subnational development banks, can be a huge part of the solution to the challenges of Latin America in the coming century. This is really a fantastic opportunity for us to get together, share information, and hopefully work together. I'm also really honored that two of our partners, BRDE and FinDeTerra, are both represented here. It's really been a great honor of the World Bank to be able to work with both of them. In the case of FinDeTerra, our relationship goes back, I think, to 1990 or 1991. and really excited to continue to work with such dedicated professionals to meet the needs of the cities of Latin America. Let me, I'm going to make 3 or 4 very quick points, Emily, and I'll try to be brief. I know it's getting late. And mostly the advantage of going at the end of the day is that you get to resume some of the critical points that have been made by some other colleagues. So let me first pick up on the point that Jean-Francois made in the introduction, the first panel this morning, to really emphasize that financial intermediaries can really fill the gap to address what is a critical market failure. And that market failure is both to having finance reach small and medium-sized cities, because we know that for the Rios of this world, for the Mexico cities of this world, there isn't such a challenge. But to really meet those small and medium-sized cities that don't have the access to long-term finance. And the second is that long-term element, because the critical challenge of the future around poverty reduction and meeting the climate change goals, both on the mitigation and adaptation side, and I'll come back to that in a minute, really need, even in this low interest rate environment that we're living these days, really need access to long-term money. And financial intermediaries, like some of those represented here, can really be the instrument to meet that gap. I do want to focus on the adaptation agenda, and I think that's just to follow up on this point, which is saying that adaptation to climate change and building resilience into how cities in the region operate is, in many respects, in our view, the frontier. It is the frontier challenge, and it's the one that we are spending so much of our time focusing on, ways that we can help build approaches to resilience. And that means resilience, broadly speaking, not only to climate change, but also to the social and environmental challenges of the day. And we see financial intermediaries, like those represented here today, as truly a platform that can extend the best practices for environmental and social management, for addressing issues of gender. This is a very gender imbalanced panel that we're on here. Emily, you're thankfully helping us out a little bit, but to address some of the critical issues around gender, around disability, and inclusion that are so critical. Let me jump to a second point, and that is really to pick up on something that Sergio said, and this will be the centerpiece of my quick points here. Sergio this morning really mentioned that SDBs, financial intermediaries, can be a bridge between the needs at the local level and an emerging international financial architecture, particularly around climate change. And Jorge mentioned part of how the Commission is supporting that. But really, we at the World Bank see SDBs as exactly that bridge. We are looking potentially to a future of climate finance that, depending on how the CIF windows evolve, may very well have a platform for cities, particularly those medium-sized cities, those ones that I mentioned that are falling behind. And I personally, and we at the World Bank, see financial intermediaries as exactly the kind of platform, the instrument that can help make that connection. One of the critical challenges that we see and that we're working now on, and it's dangerous to announce something that hasn't been formally finalized, but I will say that one of the things that we're working very hard on at the World Bank is helping cities, medium-sized cities, develop the climate investment plans, the capital investment plans for climate challenges, both on the adaptation and the mitigation side, that right now are missing. You have many, many tools out there doing very detailed analysis at the city level to understand exactly what the carbon footprint is and exactly how much emissions are going on. But what we see when we look across the region, from the big countries to the small countries, is cities are lacking that tool that says, here is off the shelf my $100 million, $50 million, $5 million plan of critical investments to reduce the impact, the climate impact of my city, and also to address the challenges around adaptation and resilience. So we at the World Bank will be working with some cities in the region to begin exactly that kind of climate investment planning tool at the city level that we see as really critical for the future. Let me just finally say that it was mentioned in one of the keynotes today that innovative finance is a tool that our colleagues at the SDBs can bring to the table, and we couldn't agree with that more. As we look across the region, we're seeing cities that have bankable projects that are going unfinanced because, frankly, they're unable to take advantage of some of the innovative finance that really is out there. Those are instruments like land-based finance, Jorge just mentioned, instruments like guarantees, credit backstopping facilities, et cetera. And really, at the World Bank, we see subnational development banks as the kind of entities that have the reach into those small and medium-sized cities that don't necessarily have the technical capacity to take advantage of some of the innovative finance that really is out there. So across those three areas around making the bridge to the international finance, around really addressing those market gaps and helping push on innovative finance, you know, our vision of working with subnational development banks is a very bright future. So we really would be very happy to continue this dialogue and participate as these conversations go forward. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here.
Merci infiniment, David. Donc, vous l'avez bien identifié. En
Thank
fait,
you very much.
ce pont entre les collectivités locales et le marché de la finance. Effectivement,
This is very important to hear. As you mentioned, the issues of the local market, you mentioned a lot of important points. We need to reinforce the financing for climate resilience, tools for integrated planning, especially for medium and small cities, and also for the SDBs to create innovative tools for finances. So thank you very much. I hope to continue this dialogue at other opportunities. And now I would like to ask our final panelist, Mr. Moises Schwartz, Manager of the Institutions for Development Sector, Inter-American Development Bank.
Where you are located. Thank you for inviting the Inter-American Development Bank to take part in this important meeting.
Obrigado pelo convite ao BID por participar aqui. Eu vou concordar com todo mundo que já falou aqui antes de mim e vou enfatizar alguns pontos. Quer dizer, o débito na América Latina e no Caribe tem um papel importante para o desenvolvimento da região. Os SDBs são financiadores de projetos relacionados a doenças infecciosas e outros aspectos. O BID é um parceiro internacional e que tem grande relacionamento com bancos subnacionais do mundo. Isso é uma estratégia muito precisa e isso forma uma rede de instituições muito interessante. E essa rede está presente aqui hoje. Os bancos subnacionais, eles têm sido essenciais para as economias dos governos. Nós trabalhamos com os bancos para poder escalonar e financiar projetos. E já financiamos mais de 2 bilhões de dólares, quase 5 bilhões em investimentos sustentáveis. A pandemia mostrou também como as instituições de financiamento são importantes nas respostas para a crise, com o estabelecimento de parcerias feitas. Nós somos parceiros nós temos parceiros para responder à pandemia do Covid-19. Em 2012, nós aprovamos programas para apoiar a liquidez de projetos, para manter o tecido sustentável da região. A ideia é que a recuperação do Covid seja de baixo carbono, seja ecológica e verde. Há oportunidade de melhorar o papel dessas instituições como players do clima aqui, desenvolvendo governos locais e
of PDB's capacities at the institutional level, that is, strengthened climate mandates, policies and targets, as well as seek accreditation from multilateral funds, and targeting investment areas that capitalize on their comparative advantages, such as building bankable projects, pipelines, increase risk mitigation instruments, and adapt financing instruments to specific contexts. The IDB's extensive work in green finance with PDBs in the region over the last decade can be supportive of their increased role to promote climate-smart urban and subnational interventions through the development of strategies, plans, and internal capacities, such as financing, structuring, financial product development, project identification, environmental and social risk management systems, to implement and prioritize green investment pathways. Supporting access financing instruments like loans, guarantees, grants from IDB and international climate funds with appropriate terms to develop the required financing solutions for clients, pioneering low carbon investments, helping to manage the higher costs and risks that first movers face, and allow PDBs to match the payback periods of green finance projects with the PDB's asset liability requirements. We have several examples of IDB supporting PDBs in inciting climate-smart subnational investments. IDB supported CFN in Ecuador, COFIDE in Peru, and Bancoldex in Colombia in the design and implementation of innovative low-carbon public transport financing programs via local financial intermediaries to promote local concessions, investments in hybrid and electric public transport vehicles. We supported Sociedad Hipotecaria Federal to develop and implement an award-winning financial solution, the COCASA program, to promote a quality seal and investments in energy-efficient low-income housing. The model has been further replicated in several additional housing programs, including in Paraguay, El Salvador, Peru, and Ecuador. The IDB supported over 6 national public banks in Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, Mexico, and Paraguay with the innovative program Energy Saving Insurance that combined offering of insurance coverage with long-term PDB's credit line to finance local SMEs energy efficiency investments, as well as private investments in public lighting. Furthermore, subnational PDBs play a specific role given their knowledge of the local context and needs. The increasing relevance of subnational development banks in the last 2 decades is related to the argument that the combination of national and subnational development policies leads to improved results as well as the prevention of capital drain from poorer to richer regions. These are just some examples of what we have done, but serve as an indication of much more than can be achieved. I'll stop here for now. Thank you very much.
Merci infiniment. On est très heureux d'avoir conclu avec votre expérience.
It was very good to hear your experience. And I just want to say that this reinforcement of the capacities of the SDBs, project portfolios, financial tools, and this adjustment to the local needs. So thank you very much for sharing your experience at the level of the IDB, and thank you very much for this exchange. I'm sure that we have a lot to learn together in this alliance of subnational development banks and a lot of cooperation and innovation that we can work together to finance the SDGs. I would like once again to thank our interpreters that are still here with us and have helped us. And Audrey, now it's with you. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists of the second and last roundtable that shared your experience with us. And I'd like to thank all the participants. There was a lot of questions made in the chat. We tried to answer them as much as possible. So here we heard the subnational development banks. We heard their experience, recommendations, proposals, and this is a very important boost for our initiative. Now we need to speak of the future, of the next steps, and also of this alliance with regard to financing common. We know we have seen that this happened after the summit, and we now have the Finance in Common, which is a system created by the development banks and their partners and their contributions. So now we will give you information about the second summit of Finance in Common. I think you should keep informed of that. And as for the future of the alliance, now I will hand the floor over to the president of AFD and also Mr. Sergio Guzmão to share his perspectives for the alliance. So I hand the floor over to you.
Thank you, Audrey, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for not having been able to be here right at the opening. I was in another event that was a little bit behind their schedule, but I've been listening to you for about an hour now, and I would really like to thank you profusely for the strength, the quality, and the friendship I felt as in this exchange we had here today. I'd like to thank Sergio very specifically, and also I'd like to thank the leadership of BDMG. They were fantastic in the preparation of this event. They are and have been our partner for 10 years. And we are very proud. Sergio, Jean-Francois, and Sebastian, thank you so much for having prepared all of this event. And thank you for my colleagues, leaders of partner banks. I see a lot of my colleagues here, Carlos, Dan, in the room. And I'd also like to thank all of the representatives of international companies, our partners who took their time here to come here to study this matter. This is a new topic. It's passionate, and subnational banks are a new passionate topic. As Audrey just said, the Finance in Common summit happened last November. So we are starting with this moment. And the idea is for us to reassess the role of public state on the development bank, especially in a crisis such as the one we are experiencing now. This is very important. It's a very important message. Now, we are readdressing this in 2021, and now we need to see the results. Or we have considered a broad approach here. Now we need to break this down to see what is possible for these banks to do. Of course, we have to work on a global level in this major public financial framework, but we have to be able to fine-tune this to get to more operational levels, both geographically and also when it comes to fine-tuning instruments as well. This is exactly what you did today. And this is why your work is specifically precious in this early 2021. Your work is very precious because, as has been mentioned here, Latin America is taking the a specific hard punch from this economic and sanitation crisis. We have a lot of people moving down to extreme poverty lines, huge numbers of unemployment, such as the UN report has just mentioned. So the region requires a lot of support. So we need to have a specific effort, specific attention to the short, medium, and long-term financial necessities of the region. Of course, it's also important to mention the message the message of subnational development banks in Latin America is specifically important for the region, but it's important for the entire world. And the French Development Agency, we know this very well. I have heard of the work connecting rural and urban works in the Food Security Summit. And this is going to be a topic that will be discussed in a second summit. This is something we have to face as we face this crisis. I also heard BRDR talk about the Sustainable Development Goal and how to align that with our communities. I've also heard of guarantee instruments. We want to reinforce our ability to structure more projects to address gender-related issues, post-pandemic issues. So in Latin America, subnational development banks needs to have a very unique action here. I think the presence of all of these institutions that have a broader spectrum in terms of activities, but also that bring focus to the work of public banks is quite precious. In closing, I say that our alliance is extremely important to attract, to draw the attention of major international partners for Latin America. We are very happy to see the engagement of the IDB. It is also the case of the AFD. We want to develop this guarantee instrument, and we are very ambitious in that sense. Our colleagues, Rebecca more specifically, was here and talked about that. I also had contact with Martin, the leader at IECD, and he's very much interested in our discussions. So this is a very useful initiative, and I'm waiting for great things in 2021 with the Regional Climate Week, with the UN in May, and this is going to be further improved up to the CO summit in 1926. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will now invite the president of BDMG and BDE to make his final remarks on the perspective he has for the future of the alliance. I'd like to thank you very much for this event, for this initiative. In French, we say that if it rains on your wedding day, you have a happy marriage. And we had lots of snow here, so I know that the alliance, this is a good omen for the alliance. Thank you very much for your words and the excellent way you conducted the work today. We who work with development financing find it very difficult not to get encouraged with all the testimonial of the works done by subnational development banks in so many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'm talking about the testimonial given by the Mexican representative, Argentina. I mean, my colleagues from all over, from the Amazon Bank and all of the institutions who were here. The support for international our international partners such as the AFD, the FMDV, and we also have the Ibero-American Secretariat represented here by our dear friend Rebecca. We were able to review this rich repertoire of financial instruments, of project structuring and getting funds that are acting all over Latin America. And today it's an opportunity for us to share experiences and knowledge amongst ourselves. So I was asked by our partners organizing this lunch, and especially Mr. Remy Rieu, Sebastian also deserves a big thank you. He works with the topic of development, and I'd like to thank the World Bank, the FMDV, the Global Fund for Cities Development, represented by Jean-Francois here and other colleagues. They were very important to design and launch this initiative here today. So, to be very straightforward here, I'd like to leave a special invitation to all of those engaging in this newborn alliance to show the world the potential of subnational development banks. But as of now, we intend to have an open source collaborative platform to contribute to the strengthening of the alliance to build a more sustainable and inclusive future. As a first concrete next steps for this initiative, we have prepared a joint statement recently published in the Alliance website, and which will be made available on the chat box as well. And I invite all of the institutions present here to sign and circulate the documents in their networks and channels, expanding their representativeness in the region. In the next few days, we'll be sending specific instructions for the subscription process. In addition, we'll start preparing for the first meeting of the Alliance, which is scheduled to happen on June 23rd, in which we'll discuss the areas of cooperation and a work plan that will guide our joint action. During the second half of 2021, and in preparation for the major events such as the second edition of the Financial Summit and COP26 in Glasgow, we will launch a comprehensive study on the subnational banks in Latin America and the Caribbean, which will address aspects related to governance, financial maturity, and investment portfolio. We hope that the findings and conclusions will support us preparing a roadmap for the Alliance, both in terms of its structure and governance and on how we will choose to act. It's important to mention that we were the leaders to launch the Alliance, but it's open to all partners. And this live network is what will allow us to have better and more relevant exchanges, so we can use all of these instruments and resources to help develop this last mile that we work on to finance territories and sustainable cities. So this whole set of initiatives and next steps will be duly communicated to all of you in advance to guarantee maximum participation and engagement. Once again, on behalf of all of the institutions who organized this lunch, BDMG, AFD, Allied, FMDV, ADDRR, the Finance in Common, represented by Audrey here. I'd like to thank you all for your participation and wish you a great week. Thank you very much and see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
Merci Sergio, merci à tous. Ciao, ciao a todos.